Today, I'm essentially talking about a new book, a report to the Club of Rome, which my dear friend Anders Wickman from Sweden and I more or less orchestrated. I mean, there were 40 people contributing to it, and I thought it might be interesting for you to learn something which, in a sense, is revolutionary. I'd rather sit down so that I can move the pictures easily. And still look at them. Here is the machine. I hope it works. Yeah, okay. So, about sustainability and responsibility, and we say nothing less than a new enlightenment will be needed. Well, in the book, we pick up an idea formulated by the earlier chief economist of the World Bank, Herman Daly, who said, better do distinguish between the empty world and the full world. Very, very different priorities, economies, habits, etc., are good for the empty world from the full world. And the first answer to the sustainability challenges of the full world is, let's simply increase efficiency. Okay, that was also my theme for 25 years. And one of the books that emerged is Factor 5, essentially demonstrating that the five-fold increase of resource productivity is technically available, but not economically, because prices are much too low. It just does not make commercial sense to increase energy productivity five-fold or so, because we waste it no end because it doesn't cost a thing. Now, of course, everybody is believing that energy is too expensive, and this is wrong. I shall be talking about it a little later. But then, efficient is good, but the Jevons paradox, formulated 150 years ago by William Stanley Jevons, essentially says that consumption typically rises faster than efficiency. So there is no gains for nature left. And that's a fact, it's an empirical fact. You know, his master example was the steam engine by James Watt, which was roughly 4 times better than the earlier steam engines that existed. But it was so elegant, so fabulously small, that you can put it on a wagon. And then you had a steam locomotive. And all of a sudden you could build a railway system. Before that was not possible. And that, of course, ate up a huge amount of coal. I mean, his book was called The Coal Question. And the efficiency in using coal was quadrupled, but the consumption rose 10-fold or 20-fold. So this is the Jevons paradox. We have to be aware of that. And again, prices is the answer to reducing the rebound effect or Jevons paradox. And that's a new book. It's called Come On. And it has been translated into Chinese. A fortnight ago, I was in Shanghai presenting the Chinese edition, and the Italian edition is there, and 20 more are in the pipeline. And essentially, it's got 3 different chapters. Come on, don't tell me the current trends are sustainable. They are not. And then, come on, don't stick to outdated philosophies. All our current philosophies are outdated regarding the ecological challenges. And then the third part is, come on, join us on an exciting journey towards a sustainable world. So it's a different meaning of come on. Nevertheless, the book is a whole, not pieces. Now, we have to talk about the Anthropocene. A new word created some 10 years ago by Paul Crutzen, the Nobel Prize winner from Holland. And he said it's a new dramatic phenomenon. Until 60 years ago or so, we were living in the Holocene, in a series of other geological ages. But now, Homo sapiens is governing it all, giving no chance to nature, unless we dramatically change our habits and technologies. I mean, this is one example. 97% of the body weights of land-living vertebrates are farmed animals and pets, that's 67%, and we humans, and only 3% are left for wild-living vertebrates. This is the quantitative relation between, and this is the full world. In the empty world, it was the opposite, of course. Of course, we were very happy with the Paris Climate Agreement, but how is it handled in the capitals of the world? When the climate diplomats come back to their capitals, how are they received? Well, if the government and parliament are more or less well-meaning, they say, oh yes, we have to do something more about climate, but it is going to be enormously costly, so we need a lot more growth, otherwise we can't fight the global warming, you know. This is a typical way of handling things. Always we need more growth. Well, the question is that the right answer? I suggest it's not. Look at these. These are 8 economic sectors, each showing strong positive correlations between expenditures per capita and CO2 emissions per capita. So, in a sense, you can say we are good doctors in terms of diagnosis, of identifying the disease, which is global warming. But we are completely mad, idiotic, as therapy doctors. The only therapy that we have available to fight the disease is making the disease worse, you know? This is how humanity is thinking. So we are in a deep philosophical crisis, not being able to find the right therapy for the diagnosed disease. We simply think we can go on like that for eternity, and we cannot. It's a self-destructing kind of habit worldwide. Well, the trouble is, people have a strong preference for reassuring lies over the inconvenient truth. This was a cartoon I saw in California at the time when Al Gore published his wonderful book and film, An Inconvenient Truth, but people prefer to go to the reassuring lie. This is how people are. They love that, because then they don't have to think. Okay, but then the Pope from Argentina did a great encyclical called Laudato Si, quoting Holy Francis. And he shows the dangers to our common home, to the earth, from the current modes of greedy people, brutal economy, and he says we are in need of a fundamental rethinking. And we at the Club of Rome transform this language into sustainability and responsibility lead to the need for a new enlightenment, a new kind of thinking, overcoming that folly that I was just describing with regard to climate change. Okay, and then we looked into the heroes of modern economics and found out they are systematically misquoted, misinterpreted. So for instance, Adam Smith, for him it was absolutely clear that the geographical reach of the market, he called it the invisible hand, was identical with the reach of the law, of the state. And then everything is fine. Then the markets are sort of embedded in a reliable kind of law. But today, markets are global, the law is national, so you can guess who is winning. It's always the markets are winning over the law. I mean, I was member of parliament when we learned that international financial markets forced Germany to reduce social security, because otherwise the returns on capital would be too low in Germany, so they would prefer investing in Ireland or in Canada or in India or some other place where they had less of social security. It was a blackmail, and it's occurring every day in all countries of the world. This, and while they are doing this, they celebrate Adam Smith as if he had thought this way. He never did. Or for David Ricardo, capital was not moving across borders, only goods and traders were. And that would then create the comparative advantages. This is his language. But today, capital is the most mobile production factor. In milliseconds, at the speed of light, more or less, capital is traveling around the world. And we were learning from a banker in the Club of Rome, Bernard Littard from Belgium. He calculated for us that out of 100 euros traveling around the world with the speed of light, 2 euros are used to buy goods and services, and 98 are pure speculative, all in the service of maximizing returns on investment. So speculation is the demon we have to beat. Or for Charles Darwin, you know, I used to be a professor of biology, so I understand a little more about Darwin. And for him, competition was mostly a local affair. When he was at the Galapagos Island, he found finches that had developed over a couple of million years into very different species, like the one on the right-hand side, the so-called woodpecker finch, which learned in evolution to crack a cactus thorn to extend its beak, so it could carve insects out of the bark of a tree. And that worked. But in the presence of real woodpeckers on Galapagos, he would never have had any chance of doing it. So barriers as a precondition for some kind of evolution. This is precisely the opposite of how economists quote Charles Darwin. Okay, those are 3 examples out of 20 you could name. So, responding to the philosophical crisis, we suggest to engage in the new enlightenment for the full world that is, and the human-centered development resulted from the old enlightenment, which was good at the time. It was perfectly legitimate. I don't go into details, but then the old enlightenment has very strong arguments in favor, the pro, but it has also cons. I mean, freedom, rationality, civil law, democracy, science and technology, and industry, and individualism, if you wish, but that is a very two-sided sword. It's also a con. Individualism is also selfishness, of course. And then colonialism. Our African friends in the Club of Rome taught us, be careful in using the positive sides of the Enlightenment, because this was also the justification of colonization. And then the reductionism, loss of morale, etc. This is also a result of the old Enlightenment. So we suggest that a new Enlightenment should be essentially built on balance. For instance, between public and private. I mean, this is what I said about Adam Smith. Or short-term and long-term. The quarterly reports are completely absurd with regard to climate change or so. Or between humans and nature. What I told you about vertebrates doesn't look like a balance. No, it's the opposite. Or between religion and state. I believe nobody in this room wants an Islamic state. Or the Christian state prior to Luther was a disaster, you know, with witch hunts, etc. So, but a state not acknowledging morale and religion, etc., is also an evil. So we need a balance again, or between feminine and masculine, everybody knows that, and equity and rewards for achievement. Of course, we need equity, but we also need rewards for achievement, and innovation and reliability. I mean, this is something for the business community to understand. In business schools, you always learn that the fastest is winning, and the slowest, they are the losers. Okay, too bad for them. But in my understanding of systems, it is clear that a system in which always the fastest is winning is self-destroying. It can't be stable, by definition. Okay, and Western thinking tends to lean to dogmatism, while in Asia, they celebrate balance. I mean, if you're talking about some quarrels they have somewhere, if you are in America or in Europe, your first reaction is, well, one is right and the other is wrong, and the search for truth means that he who is wrong is beating the other guy who is wrong. Okay, so right is winning over wrong. In mathematics, it happens to be true. But in the real world of, for instance, politics, it's not. And if exactly the same quarrel is presented to a person from India, or from Japan, or from China, the automatic reaction is, well, of course, both are right. So we Westerners have to learn from that. And then the new enlightenment should, of course, fit for the full world. It should reflect the needs of our grandchildren. Solidarity should be valued higher than selfishness. The balance must be restored between public and private. And the enlightenment should have a global horizon. And I believe Europe and Asia will have to work hard and escape from the Anglo-American dominance and obsession with its financialized philosophy. Thank you.
How can we support John to find new solutions? How can we discuss with René to find new solutions? And how can we maybe change the academic world to find a way to teach young people and to do our work in companies, in politics, to follow the right path? And we have also George Kell here, we have Mr. Pretorius, so they all can bring in their knowledge. They have been working for a long time on this field. We are ready now for discussion.